My beloved child, stop scrolling for a moment. Do not rush past this message, because something has shifted around you, something you could not see with your physical eyes, something that began moving the moment you finally stopped forcing what was never meant to be forced. What you are about to hear was meant to find you at this exact moment. Not yesterday, not tomorrow, now. Because there is a reason your heart has been carrying a strange feeling lately. A reason you have caught yourself smiling for no obvious reason. A reason certain memories suddenly feel softer than they used to. A reason your spirit has been sensing movement before your circumstances could prove that anything was changing. And there is something else. Someone is smiling too. Someone whose name may not have appeared on your screen, whose voice may not have reached your ears, whose hands may still be far from yours, but whose heart has already begun responding to something heaven has been quietly arranging. Your soulmate can't stop smiling, because you finally did this. You finally stopped chasing. You finally stopped begging for signs. You finally stopped trying to convince someone to see your value. You finally released what you thought you had to control, and that release created space. My child, you thought nothing was happening because you could not see the answer, but heaven does not always move loudly. Sometimes the greatest movement begins in silence. Sometimes the door opens before you hear the lock turn. Sometimes two people begin moving toward each other long before either one realizes that their paths are changing. And tonight, I want you to understand something that may completely change the way you look at your waiting season. You were not forgotten. You were being repositioned. Pause here for a moment and breathe. Think about how many times you wondered, why is it taking so long? Think about the nights when you looked at your phone and saw nothing, the moments when you wondered whether someone was coming at all, the times you questioned whether love was simply something other people received while you were left watching from the outside. You may have smiled during the day and told everyone you were fine, but heaven saw the questions you whispered when nobody else could hear you. Heaven saw the tears you wiped away before anyone entered the room. Heaven saw the messages you typed and deleted. Heaven saw the moments when you almost reached back toward someone who had already shown you that they could not hold your heart carefully. And then something happened inside you. You became tired. Not tired of love, tired of carrying love alone. That distinction changed everything, because there comes a moment when the soul finally whispers, I cannot keep doing this. And that moment is not failure, it is surrender. It is the moment your hands open, it is the moment you stop saying, it has to happen this way. And instead you begin saying, if it is truly meant for me, let it come in the right way. My beloved child, that sentence may have been one of the most powerful prayers you ever prayed. You may not have realized it. You may have spoken it through tears. You may have whispered it after disappointment. You may have said it while staring at the ceiling late at night, wondering why your heart still believed in something your eyes could not see. But heaven heard it. And when you stopped trying to write the ending yourself, something beyond your understanding began writing the next chapter. This is why I need you to listen carefully. The person connected to your heart is not necessarily smiling because everything has already happened. They are smiling because something inside them has changed. there is a new lightness, a new curiosity, a strange warmth that appears when they think about you. They may not even understand it yet. They may be going about an ordinary day when suddenly your memory crosses their mind. And instead of feeling confusion, they feel peace. Instead of feeling resistance, they feel warmth. Instead of asking, "Why am I thinking about this person again?" they find themselves smiling, and that smile matters, because sometimes the heart recognizes movement before the mind can explain it. There are people who enter your life through noise, and there are people whose presence feels strangely familiar before you have even had enough time to understand why. This connection carries that strange familiarity, not because you are being asked to abandon reason, not because every coincidence is a divine promise, but because there are moments in life when two people become ready at different times. And the moment they finally become ready at the same time, everything begins to feel different. Your soulmate may have spent a long time trying to understand why previous connections never settled their heart. They may have experienced relationships that looked perfect from the outside but left them empty inside. They may have convinced themselves that they were better alone. They may have buried the desire for something deeper because disappointment had taught them to expect less. And then something about your energy, your absence, your growth, or even the memory of you began disturbing that old belief. Not painfully, beautifully, because you became evidence that what they had been trying to forget was still possible. Real connection, safe affection, peace without boredom, passion without chaos, love without constantly wondering where you stand. But here is where the story becomes more mysterious. You thought the distance was separating you. What if the distance was preparing you? What if every delay was forcing both of you to become people who could actually sustain the thing you were asking heaven to bring? Because there is a difference between receiving love and being ready to carry it. You prayed for someone who would choose you. But first, you had to learn how to choose yourself. You prayed for someone who would communicate honestly. But first, you had to stop silencing your own truth just to keep someone near. You prayed for someone who would recognize your worth. But first, you had to stop negotiating your worth with people who could not recognize it. You prayed for someone who would stay. But first, you had to learn that walking away from what repeatedly wounded you was not abandonment. It was self-respect, and when you finally did that, something shifted. You became quieter, stronger, less available for confusion. You stopped chasing breadcrumbs and started waiting for something whole. You stopped asking, "How can I make this person love me?" and began asking, "Does this love honor who I am becoming?" That was the moment. That was the change. That was what your soulmate felt, even if they could not put words to it, because energy changes before circumstances change. Your posture changed, your standards changed, your prayers changed, your silence changed, and somewhere, somehow, another heart began responding to that change. This is why you have felt different lately. You may have noticed that certain things that once triggered you do not control you anymore. You may have noticed that you can think about love without immediately feeling desperate for an answer. You may have noticed that you are becoming strangely peaceful about something you once begged to understand. That peace is not emptiness. It is preparation. And there is something heaven wants you to know about preparation. It often looks like nothing is happening. That is why so many people quit just before the turning point. They mistake silence for absence. They mistake delay for denial. They mistake uncertainty for rejection. But sometimes the silence is simply the sound of things being arranged beyond your immediate sight. Distance disappear? When will the sign become undeniable? When will you finally know that all this waiting meant something? My child, I could give you a date, I could give you a name, I could give you a specific moment. But then you might spend every waking hour looking for the answer instead of becoming ready for it. So listen deeper. The greatest sign may not be what happens outside you. It may be what no longer happens inside you. You no longer panic, you no longer chase, you no longer settle, you no longer need someone else's attention to prove that you are worthy of love. That is why your soulmate can't stop smiling, because the person they are being drawn toward is no longer the person who was desperately waiting to be rescued. You are becoming the person who can stand beside them. There is a difference, and that difference is powerful. Imagine this for a moment. Somewhere in an ordinary place, on an ordinary day, your soulmate is moving through their routine. They are not standing beneath a dramatic sky. There are no angels announcing your name. Nothing around them appears supernatural, and yet, something happens. A thought of you, a memory, a feeling, a sudden curiosity. Maybe they hear something that reminds them of you. Maybe they see a place. Maybe they encounter a phrase. Maybe they remember a conversation. Maybe they simply feel that strange pull towards something they cannot explain. And for a moment, they stop, then they smile, not because they know the entire story, but because something in them suddenly feels hopeful. That hope is important, because they have been afraid too. You were not the only one healing. You were not the only one questioning. You were not the only one learning how to let go. There were battles happening inside them that you never witnessed. There were fears they never told you about. There were old wounds influencing decisions you thought were about you. There were moments when they wanted closeness but became frightened by what closeness required. There were times when they wanted to reach out but convinced themselves that silence was safer. And perhaps that is one of the hardest truths for you to accept. Sometimes people do not walk away because they feel nothing. Sometimes they walk away because they feel too much and do not yet know how to hold it. But do not misunderstand this. You were never meant to chase someone into readiness. You were never meant to become smaller so another person could feel safe. You were never meant to wait indefinitely for someone who refused to choose you. Your role was not to rescue them. Your role was to become whole, and somehow, as you became whole, the entire dynamic began changing. The old version of this story depended on you reaching. The new version requires both hearts to move. That is why the atmosphere feels different. That is why your intuition keeps whispering that something is approaching. That is why you have moments where you suddenly feel peaceful for no logical reason. Something is being prepared. But before you get too excited, I need to tell you something that may surprise you. The reunion you are imagining may not arrive in the form you expect. It may not begin with a dramatic confession. It may begin with a simple message, a small conversation, an unexpected encounter, a name appearing where you did not expect to see it, a moment so ordinary that you almost dismiss it. And that is why you must stay awake, not anxious, awake. There is a difference. An anxious heart searches everywhere for proof. An awake heart notices what is real. You do not need to force the door. You only need to recognize when the right door opens. And when it does, you will notice something different. There will be no need to perform, no need to convince, no need to over-explain, no need to wonder whether you are wanted. The connection will have room to breathe. It will not require you to abandon yourself. It will not demand that you accept confusion as passion. It will not make you prove that you deserve basic tenderness. You have already learned too much to return to that. Your heart has paid too high a price for you to confuse chaos with destiny again. And this is where your story becomes even more beautiful, because the person approaching you is not simply coming to give you romance. They are coming into a version of your life that you had to build without them. They are not the foundation. They are part of what can be built upon it. That changes everything. You are no longer waiting for someone to complete you. You are becoming someone who can share completeness, and your soulmate is learning the same lesson. That is why their smile keeps appearing. That is why something about the future no longer feels as heavy. That is why they may be remembering you differently. Before, they may have remembered the complications. Now, they remember the feeling. Before, they may have focused on what went wrong. Now, they wonder what could go right. Before, they may have asked whether it was practical. Now, something inside them is asking whether it is worth being brave. And courage is beginning to rise. My child, do you understand what that means? The battle was never simply about getting two people together. The deeper battle was about becoming two people who could meet without destroying what they had spent years healing. That is why the waiting mattered. That is why the silence mattered. That is why your growth mattered. And that is why what happens next cannot be forced. Something is already moving, but there is one final piece of this revelation that you have not seen yet, one hidden detail, one small decision, one moment that may have already happened without you realizing its significance, because your soulmate did something recently, something simple, something you would never guess. And that small action may be the reason their heart feels lighter now. You may think I am talking about a message they sent. You may think I am talking about a confession. You may think they finally searched for you, finally asked about you, finally admitted something. But no, it was quieter than that, much quieter, and somehow, it changed the direction of the story. Because your soulmate finally did something they had been resisting for a long time. They finally allowed themselves to imagine a future where you were not a memory, but a possibility. And once they allowed that possibility to enter their heart, something began unfolding that neither of you can fully see yet. The next sign will not look like the sign you have been waiting for. It will arrive disguised as something ordinary. And when it happens, you will understand why heaven made you. Wait, because the person who finally reaches for you will not be reaching from fear. They will be reaching from a decision, and that decision has already begun.